Hello, everyone. I know a lot of you here, but if some of you may not know me, my name is Cleo Fagan. I'm the Education Curator here at Hugh Gallery. So you're just really welcome, and thanks so much for coming today. So I just want to give you a little bit of context on the talks and the project. So Boghanna Báistí Beaga is the second iteration of our Artists in Residence programme in partnership with NEIC and with early years artist Helen Barry. For this iteration, she has worked with local preschool Holy Child, three preschool groups. So it's been approximately 1 day per week in the school between October 2024 and May 2025. So this programme at Holy Child Preschool is peppered with monthly visits to Hugh Gallery with teachers and parents. Today we will hear presentations from some of the key people in the project: artist Helen Barry, Holy Child Principal Mark Shinnick, and project evaluator Bernadette Larkin. In the spirit of inquiring into the fertile overlap between professional visual art practice and work by and with early years children, we are also delighted to welcome artist Jane Hayes, whose work focuses on early years. So behind me is the documentation film Boghanna Báistí Beaga, which you will be able to watch downstairs if you haven't seen the exhibition already with the sound on. So it's a really wonderful interactive exhibition, and I hope you have a bit of time to go and see it. And some of you know we'll be closing the doors of the gallery to the public after the 28th of September for a minimum of 3 years to allow for the refurbishment of the gallery and also the building of the new library, City Library next door. But just to say, we'll continue to work in an outreach context, including with early years. And also just to say that it's part of Hugh Gallery's strategic plan 2025 to 2030 to support excellence in art education, which includes the development of innovative and durational early years programming, which is reflected in this project. So I'm really delighted as well that Liz Coman is available today and is chairing. She chaired this event last year, and we're really happy to have her back. And Liz Coman is Head of Children and Young People's Art at the Arts Council of Ireland. And over to you, Liz. Thanks so much.
Hi everybody, how are you? And thank you all for coming and making it this morning in this kind of bizarre weather system that we're all in, with like massive flashing rain and beautiful sunshine. I just want to say, I'm going to just, for the course of the session, I'm going to kind of be the timekeeper. So if you see me kind of like speakers, if you see me like doing this, because I know I'm going to be the worst timekeeper in the world, because we're all going to get really caught up in this beautiful work. And it's a joy to be here. And thank you, Cleo, for the invitation. It's a joy to spend a morning with you, looking at early childhood arts and thinking about it. And I suppose just on the bus on the way in, I was reflecting on it a little bit in terms of a 10-year kind of journey. And I thought it might be helpful just to place some of this work in context, because it is very much a piece of work that is of its community and of a very particular community. And at the same time, I wanted to place it within a national framework as well, because I think the work really deserves that. And I think also, I think there's often that local national place that we're all in that feels quite separate from each other. So I just was trying to map that out a little bit, or kind of just think about that myself this morning. In terms of the national, I've just come from Dublin City Council. Hello, here she is. Hello. In the arts office, where I am an arts officer, and I would also know the NEIC from that perspective, and the NEIC initiative from that perspective. But I'm working on secondment in the Arts Council for a period of time, and I suppose also worked 10 years ago in the Arts Council as advisor in the area of children and young people's arts. And that's, I suppose, what's triggering some of my thinking this morning, that 10 years ago, possibly 12 years ago, this work was extremely new within the Arts Council. It was extremely new within the Department of Children and Young People at the time. And at the same time, it was impossible not to pay attention to it, because the artists and the arts organisations that were putting in applications, morning Jessica, were really, really pushing this work to the very top of the pile, in terms of, you can imagine when you're sitting in a place behind those closed doors, there's a lot of applications coming at you and a lot of great work coming at you. But this work was extremely special and was really standing out in terms of the evaluation of it, but also this idea that we actually had to start to recognise it and think about it. So I just wanted to kind of put that down to say it is probably an early stage within the arts, the wider arts development, but it has been actively being developed over the last 10, 15 years. Also to say the local authorities have been extremely proactive in that space over that time as well, whether they are funding directly or building residency programs. They have been extremely proactive and developing very, very bespoke kind of provision or responses to early childhood arts. Because as Mark was going to tell us now, we're not in the Arts Council or in local authorities directly responsible for the arts in early childhood, but we do have to work in partnership, and so therefore trying to figure out what our role is and how our resources can fit to that role is kind of an ongoing question that we're always having. So yes, I just wanted to say, and over that 10-year period, my colleague Sean and Eve would have worked really, really hard with the Department of Children and Young People. There is now a scheme that the Arts Council operates that is an annual fund for settings and artists to apply into every year. Comes up around March, April. It is a nice chunk of money if you can get it. It's very competitive, of course, but that is also a good thing, because it means that it's kind of shouting into the Arts Council that this work needs more advocacy and needs more resourcing. I just also want to shout out to the likes of, I suppose, the organisations who fit within the Children and Young People's areas, such as the ARC, the likes of Barbaro Festival, some of the smaller theatre companies who've been championing this work also. So just to really say that we are not alone in this room today. We are sitting beside a lot of very, very competent and passionate artists, but also arts organisations and government bodies who are trying to push this agenda. And while we might feel, oh God, there's not enough being done, there is work happening, and yes, we need to do more. And it's trying to figure out how to best progress with that. So I suppose leaving it at that, I just want to introduce our first speaker. Mark is going to present to us, and he's going to talk about collaborative creativity, educators and perspectives. And I know he's not going to talk about that. He's going to totally blow us away in terms of his passion for his area of work. And, you know, I know Mark's work from a distance for a very long time, and always in conversation with him, he is a very honest and forthright and a very strong advocate for this work. So I think I'm looking forward to this. He has been working in this area of the NEIC. He's the principal of Holy Child Preschool in Rutland Street since 2002. Go Mark, jeez, incredible. During which time included moving to a new state-of-the-art building, opening a special class for autistic preschoolers, and surviving the effects of COVID pandemic on the school community. That's particular work, really. He is passionate about the creative arts and supports the school in accessing and participating in many arts projects over the years. On a personal level, you can catch Mark in Ralph Farnham's theatre production of Portia Coughlin at the Mill Theatre in November. So there we go. I'll hand you over to Mark. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm usually used to speaking to children between the ages of 3 and 5, so if I get a bit nervous, please bear with me. But I'm honoured actually to be here, because I think it's an important time for us in Holy Child Preschool, but I'm also honoured that it's a collaborative approach with Helen and with the Hugh Gallery. And I'm speaking on behalf of Sinead, Judy, Alison, Evia, Michaela and Rachel, who are busy exploring and thinking with our children today in Holy Child Preschool. So let's start. So a bit about the school first in context. What was it? Yeah. most children in areas of disadvantage only went to primary school. My parents as well, they only got the primary school certificate, and then you went and did maybe a tech for a year, and then you went to work. So what they noticed was that in areas of disadvantage, children were failing the primary school certificate and they were coming out with poor literacy and numeracy skills. So, for example, you can see these lovely houses here. They were Georgian houses, but when the affluent people moved out, they became tenements. There is Rutland Street, which at one stage had 1,200 children in known as the Red Brick Slaughterhouse. So it took a Dutch organisation, the Bernard van Leer Foundation, to encourage the Department of Education to set up an early intervention programme to prevent school failure. So we were set up in 1969. I think the hope was that this would be replicated around the country, but it never was. So we're the only standalone preschool in the Republic of Ireland who is under the Department of Education and Youth. That's good sometimes, but it's not so good other times. So there's some pictures of the pilot project that was set up in '69. And what they found was that when children went into primary school, all the benefits that they gained were lost because they went into schools of maybe 50 children, one adult. So it was only in later years. And in 1993, they did a study to see where are these children now as adults. And they compared them to a group of adults who'd never been to a preschool or an early years setting and from a similar socioeconomic background. So the one finding that we always focus on is that adults who'd been to Holy Child Preschool had more positive social hobbies and outlets and activities in adulthood. So we use that as our remit to make sure that creative arts and education continues in Holy Child Preschool. But we've always had a connection with the Hugh Lane Gallery. This is our third installation that I know of. The picture there actually is in 2009, we moved to a lovely new school in Sean McDermott Street, and the stained glass artist, Peter Young, won the Percent for Art project. Why he got it was he didn't come in with, this is what I'm going to do. He said, I'm going to work with the children and explore what their stories are. And out of the stories he did in the preschool and the primary school, he made a stained glass window. There are 8 pieces made in Germany, so there's no actually lead through it. And it's a wonderful beacon out to the community. And that's called the Big Cheese. So Natasha Fitchell worked with us in 2001, 2002, using items she found out in the community. So this was known as the Pirate Tree Island and the Magic Horses, which was wonderful. We still talk about that. And then Margot Jones, who worked in conjunction, I think, with Puka Puppets. We did a lovely exhibition then with her. She worked with the children for over 8 weeks in relation to bears in the woods. And we had our installation there in the Hugh Lane Gallery as well. So there's great connections and reconnections there. So somebody asked me, why do we work with Helen Barry? Well, first of all, I suppose it was a long-term project, an artist in residence, and this is the nearest thing we as educators could get to what we call the Reggio Emilia. I'm sure some of you know about the Reggio Emilia approach, that it was a state in Italy after World War II decided what are we going to do to rebuild our country. They used that focus to work with young children. So in the Reggio Emilia centres, they actually have artists who work in the creativity with the children in the centre. So this was our nearest thing we could get to being a Reggio Emilia approach. Second one, and equally important, is working with an established artist who is not afraid of working with young children ages 3 to 5. So sometimes we've had artists coming in, but their approach would have been more for older children. So we were delighted that Helen has the power to work with young children and also the power to actually listen and engage with them. So that from the very set go, we could see that. It was great that 50% of our children, we had 3 groups, could actually access this project over the years. So it was actually a great return for us. And again, the focus was on the children being active agents in their own learning. So that was something very positive for us. And the parental involvement is something that's very important as well, and it was something that made us want to buy into this artist in residence program, because it can be a challenge sometimes to have parents to get involved, but doing something that was creative and not demanding on them, and where they could see the fun that the children were having as well as learning. That was a very positive approach. And again, our Ashton curriculum framework, which is for children ages 0 to 6, this project ticked all the boxes for us. And again, we're very fortunate that we have enthusiastic staff who are used to working in a creative arts approach. And we used our canteen. Since COVID, we haven't gone back to eating in the canteen, which is a pity, but slow steps. But it was a wonderful space then for Helen and the children to use. So it was great that we had that added space. And lastly, but not least, we actually, early year services has a wonderful creativity and enthusiasm, but we don't have the money to match that. So it's great that we could have somebody like the NEIC to actually fund and support us. So again, engaging with the artist, you can see some of these photographs here. I had notes here, but I can't see them here. That doesn't matter, I'll wing it. So again, it was great that we could see the children engaging with Helen. Sometimes some children, as you can see in the picture, are just observing, and that was okay too. Some of the children mightn't really want to engage in a group exercise, so they were given opportunities, Helen and Tamau, to actually do their own creativity on their own, but maybe we would call that parallel play. So Helen had a great way of a ritual of the sessions, and I think over the 28 weeks, that was great for the children because they like routine, they like structure, so they could get that at the beginning where they're playing with the musical instrument, they're doing their stretches, they might sing a song. Again, I think that picture captures the positive relationship that Helen had. Again, we talked about exploring and thinking, which is one of our Ashton themes. Children were able to use a variety of materials. Sometimes these would be materials that us as educators probably wouldn't use. You'll see some photographs in a minute, but this reminded me of something that Lucy Hale is trying to encourage educators about, the idea of creating art in different positions and different spaces. So I love the idea that we have Yasmin and Natalia there working upside down and creating lovely artwork. Again, we said the space was a variety of materials that Helen introduced each week and build on the experience that the children have. You can see the whole charcoal was a wonderful experience for the children as well. I was there that week during the umbrellas, and the amount of enjoyment, and you're talking about children ages 3-4 who could actually sustain interest in learning for 45-60 minutes without a break. So I think that was a testament to the planning that Helen and Tamau had done for the children. I suppose the success of this from our educators' point of view was the positive parental or family involvement that came with this. So even bringing the parents up to the Hugh Lane Gallery, it's a wonderful cultural institution in our locality, but sometimes we might have barriers that would prevent us from going in. So this was an ideal opportunity for us to bring the parents in, and it was a great way for the children to show their creativity. And I think parents as well, when they knew that they didn't have to clean up afterwards, when they knew they didn't have to do anything, I think that created a relaxation for them. And I know Bernadette might touch on it a bit later, but it also, I suppose, was an awareness for some of our parents that maybe their child is unique and maybe may have additional needs or neurodiverse. And I suppose that's in a calm environment, in an inclusive environment, they could come to that conclusion, which was good as well for them to see. Again, we had this marching up to the Hugh Lane Gallery. It's great that we didn't have transport costs. And again, learning from us, from Helen and Tamau, would be the idea that how they used different materials and activities. So just a simple thing like that, using that to, I won't say control the children, but it's giving them an environment where they can be creative. And that was just a very simple way of managing the young children. Again, I mentioned the ritual of the tongue drum, and children loved that, and that was the whole ritual. We forget that ritual is important for the young children. Again, you can see the parents involved in looking at the children's work. This is the wonderful about family involvement. This young girl, Cassandra, isn't part of her school, but the mother obviously has no childcare, so she brought Cassandra with her, and there's Cassandra in the middle working with the children. So that's the idea of involvement. And again, something else we learned from Helen, having the onesies is a great idea. so that children can explore in their own way. And we talked about parallel play, but sometimes children that may have additional needs, that Helen and Jamal gave them the opportunity to explore themselves in the environment, but doing something separate. Again, we had wonderful ideas of working with the children in the classroom as well. So that was great for Helen to go into the classroom so that she could see what the children were doing as well. These are just some of the photographs. You notice that sometimes children work in small groups, sometimes children prefer to work on their own. So there's a variety of pictures there that would actually highlight, we give the children those opportunities. And you can see the inclusiveness of our school. We're quite a multicultural, so it was great to actually support parents from migrant communities who wished to take part but weren't sure whether they would or not. Helen was great at giving a pep talk at the beginning when we go into the Hugh Gallery, so that was great for the children to know what they're doing. So some of them may not have had that experience before, so it was great that they would actually get the pep talk before they go in to do the activity as well. So what we loved about this was the ritual. And again, what Helen had, the maths were just a simple way for the children to be able to sit down as well. So they were used to that in the school space, but also bringing that then into the Hugh Gallery was important. Again, there's some of our parents involved. Again, this is our Astra curriculum framework, and we felt that at the end of the 28 weeks, we had used our Boghanna Báistí Beaga as a way of promoting confident and competent, but we also call it the 3 C's. We have creative learners in our preschool, so we definitely would put that into our monthly reports, that the work that we did with Helen was very important, and that was part of the children's learning experience. And this is the success. This is our research. We do research based on photographs, so again we use that for parents to see the work that the children do. One of the positive things about COVID-19 was that we used an online platform called Seesaw. So some parents who didn't get to the Hugh Lane or get to the art, we actually would show that up to the parents so they could actually see that experience, and it also meant that they were more enthusiastic and perhaps they would come the following time to the Hugh Lane Gallery as well. So I'll just have to finish up by saying a big thank you. Thank you to Helen and Jamal for their creativity, for the staff who were enthusiastic in working with Helen, to the children who took part, some more so than others, but that's all part of being an inclusive community. To Cleo, Jessica, and everybody in Hugh Lane Gallery, thanks again for your enthusiasm, and for the NEIC for their wisdom in funding creative arts for children under the age of 5, because sometimes we're very much the forgotten members of our community, and it's great to see, like what Liz was saying in relation to the Arts Council, that there's more and more happening, and there's more artists working creatively with children and educators. If I missed out anything, you can ask me later, but thanks very much.
Mark, loads to pick up on there in our Q&A, and some beautiful words that you used, like ritual, and just also maybe unpacking later the parental involvement, which I think is such an interesting one. And then also thank you for mentioning Ashtir. I think Ashtir was probably brought to our attention as well in terms of by artists applications coming in, the likes of Helen talking about it. It has been a curriculum framework that I think has fit well with creativity and kind of arts processes for very young children. But I think also there's probably more language, I think, like you're describing there, that we can think about layering into that space. And I wouldn't be au fait with where that is right now, but that's probably a question I'll go away with myself today. So next up is Bernadette. So Bernadette and I go way back. We met each other a long time ago through the ARC. Bernadette was the project manager for the ARC's Fatima Mansion's ArcLink programme. And I suppose really she's the person who I have a lot of conversations with. We talk a lot about different kind of the complexities of, I suppose, the environment we work in, sometimes that feeling of isolation that can happen when you're working in this kind of space, but also the complexity of being in a community context. And thank you also, Mark, for mentioning the NEIC funding, because just to name check Irma Grothis, who initiated this programme as the NEIC programme coordinator, and just how important that was in its initiation, because in doing that she also set up a number of other residency programs in other childcare settings in the neighbourhood. And I think that for me has always been, while that the sustaining that is really difficult, I think the idea of having a very enriched early childhood arts neighbourhood, I think it's a very interesting idea that is worth not letting go. So Bernadette, back to where we met, which was in a particular neighbourhood. Bernadette is an arts educator and creative producer with over 30 years experience in the sector. Her practice aims to encourage the links between education and artistic expression in schools, communities and beyond. She is dedicated to making the arts accessible to all, designing and delivering programmes that foster creativity, critical thinking and a sense of cultural entitlement to children across ages and abilities. Bernadette worked as project manager for ArcLink in Fatima Mansions, an initiative of the Arc Children's Cultural Centre, head of education and programmes in Airfield Estate, Dublin, and as a freelance practitioner, roles have included Children's Art and Education Advisor for the Arts Council of Ireland, Reader in Residence, UNESCO City of Literature, Project Manager for Dublin City Council, Arts Office and Culture Company, and Evaluator for the NEIC Artists in Residence Programme. She holds a Master in Education from NUI Maynooth and a Social Entrepreneurs Ireland. So Bernadette, over to you.
Hi everybody. Two things you need to know about me is my greatest fears are mice and public speaking. Yeah. So here I am. So just a little bit about me first, and it's not being egotistical, I think it's relevant. I'm a Dub, I grew up just off Camden Street on Camden Row. We didn't have an immersion in the arts or culture. High culture was the panto in the Gaiety on Christmas. And my dad's friend worked in the Gaiety and he used to get us free tickets. And my mother always had a box of milk tray. So that was like big excitement. The other thing was we lived near enough to the National Gallery. I was part of that generation of free range kids. So we would just go over to the gallery and go in. But we were terrified because the attendants were so cross. And I suppose you can't blame them. This was a group of kids rocking up on their own. But what I never thought was culture or the arts was Kevin Street Library. And Kevin Street Library saved my life because I was an early school leaver. I dropped out due to family circumstances. I married young and had my kids young. And then I went back to education later, but I kind of wondered what kept that connection with me. And it was that sustained engagement with literature. But what made Kevin Street Library different was, and I think still people don't think of libraries as arts venues or cultural venues, but it was full of ordinary people. And there weren't any rules really apart from the librarians being terrifying. And I went there so often that they told me you could only go 3 times a week and you could only borrow books 3 times a week. So my friend and I devised this scheme where we would go together, get 6 books and then swap the books. So, we maximised our Enid Blyton collection and what was the other one I loved? Nancy Drew. Yeah. So anyway, but I'm not sure that I would get a job in the arts now. And I'm sorry if I'm being long-winded about that, but I got a work placement in IMA and in the ARC, and I was offered jobs in both after them. I had no leaving cert. I had nothing. I had no qualification in the arts at all. And I remember Liz McMahon said to me, "You're really good at this." And I said to her, I don't want to work with children. And here I am 30 odd years later. But, and I went to work in the ARC, and Martin Drury actually said to me, "I'm hiring you for your instinct." But I don't know that would happen now. And I learned very quickly when I went in that I was an outlier. Everybody else had a degree. I didn't even have my leaving cert. I kept quiet about that. And I learned also that there are no rooms in the arts, they're all spaces. So, you know, the language is different. But through the ARC, I was on a CE scheme there, and through the ARC, I went and I did a degree with the Open University. And then I, went on to a load of different jobs. When Fatima came up, I was 9 years in the ARC, so when the Fatima project came up, I was hoping I'd get it. I really, really wanted that. And again, Martin said to me, I think you're the right person because of your heart and your head and your politics. And again, do we look at things in nuanced ways? I just wonder, it's just a question that I'm putting out there. So that's why my heart is in projects like this, because I think it gives kids like me the chance to engage fully in the arts. And that's why I love the idea of cultural entitlement and building that in children, that they know they deserve this, that they want this. Anyway, back to the project. Enough about me. So the evaluation, the purpose and scope, it would build on the previous evaluation, which is a hefty document, so I've big shoes to fill there, but it would focus on the artistic and creative development, primarily of the children, but also of the artist, because I think often the artist gets lost, their own creative journey within a project like this. Sometimes that gets, it's their job. But Helen and I have had lots of discussions about her learnings through this project. The educators, their role in the process, it's a vital role in the process. They were the middlemen. As Mark said there about parents noticing that there's a difference with their children, it's the teachers that are going to kind of deal with that. The parents, their observations, their experiences of the project, like it was just so powerful to see so many parents coming. But that was, I'm talking now about the purpose and scope of I tripped myself up, about the purpose and scope of the evaluation. And then we wanted to look at the gallery staff and visitors and the impact, if any, on them. So establishing the parameters of the methodology. So I attended, I'm sure we've all been parts of evaluations where you get to the end and you get a list of what you've done wrong. And if you're lucky, you get a list of what you've done right too. So I sat down with Jessica and Cleo early on, and we decided what kind of evaluation would this be. So we decided it would be an iterative one, that it would reinforce the ethos of the project, and it aimed to build more collaboration and trust, so that we were all kind of working for the same thing, and any issues could be addressed straight away. And this was really vital, I think, because also at the start, the educators had to be really encouraged to feed back, because I think it could be an Irish thing. I don't know. The way we're terrified of anything critical. We just don't. We want to be nice all the time. But their information was really, really valuable because they knew the kids, they knew the parents, but they knew what would work as well. But they were really, at the same time, they were open to all activities, all suggestions, and there was such a positivity there and such a joy, actually. And we needed to know what extra needs the children had. If a child wasn't engaging, was it the activity that wasn't suiting them, or was there something else going on? So the educators were vital in that role. So the evaluation would value process over product and examine the evolving nature of artistic development. So it was my job to really look closely at the children. And I'll touch on it later, because often we're looking for monumental changes. And that doesn't happen. If we're realistic about it, it doesn't happen. And I feel it's in that slow, repetitive engagement that enrichment happens. So it would value growth, it would value persistence, exploration and decision-making over technical perfection or end results. And I'm sure some of you have visited places sometimes and you think, children really did that work? Like, God, a 4-year-old did that, but you can see in the work downstairs, that's children's work. And one of the things that I loved about it was that you know, I said it to Helen that this was like the Lundy model in action. We were totally child-led. And that was down to Helen and to Mao. And I think the children thought Mao was one of them. One of the things came out about the chat with Jessica and Cleo early on was that Helen needed an assistant. Because those of you who know Helen will know she's Superwoman and she wants to do everything herself and can do everything herself. But once Mao came on, it changed the dynamic of the project. And I think I'm right in saying that you said you felt more like the artist then than kind of managing. So my methodology then was observation, structured interviews, and informal discussions. And the observation, I got lost in the observation because I love it. And I think I probably attended far more sessions than I was expected to or needed to. But I just loved it, you know, and just seeing the micro growths every week, you know, and seeing the children go from being nervous to knowing we're going to see Helen, seeing just micro shifts in children. I called this marching to the beat of my own drum because that's what they do. That's what children do. And a few in particular that have additional needs, you know, you didn't know really whether anything was happening, but because it was a luxury, I suppose, to have, you know, this length of evaluation and for me to have that time to go and observe, because as I say, we're talking about micro shifts. You know, a little girl, for example, who is nonverbal and walks around in circles a lot of the time. There was one day Helen was playing her xylophone and she stopped. And it was only because I was watching her. You know, she didn't say anything, she stopped. Her body language changed and then she moved along. And one of the educators noticed that she was a bit more verbal on certain sessions. And then, you know, she would walk and stand in front of Helen sometimes or touch Helen, you know. So it's little things like that that are really hard to describe, but really are monumental in many ways. So early outcomes and observations, I'm still writing the evaluation, and as Liz would attest, I could go on writing for years because, first of all, I love this. And every time I write something, I think, oh, and it's leading off on another tangent. So it could be like, you know, my life's work. It could be as big as the Bible or Ulysses or something by the time I'm finished. But I did promise I'd have it in a couple of weeks. So Cleo talked on the video about everybody gathering around these children to unite, to make sure that they had the best possible experience. Everybody was invested in that. And I suppose in that inner circle was the artist and the children. And I kind of think of it as like a scaffolding process, that everybody united together to support the artist and the child to have that wonderful experience. The educators obviously were part of that because, as I say, they had to field the difficult questions. You know, initially there would be stuff that seems inconsequential, like children going home filthy, you know. But that is a big thing. If somebody doesn't like that, or if some child has had new clothes on them or whatever, it's the educator that has to deal with that, not the artist or not myself. And they were great about it. And actually, to be honest, I think there was only one parent that had real difficulty with the dirt aspect of it. But you know, but most of them just said, "Oh, sure, it washes off. It's great," you know. And then the onesies were a great idea, and they loved getting into those. You know, there were one or two initially that kind of didn't want to, but it was even that's growth, you know. So the parents themselves were really interesting because, as Mark showed on the his talk, you know, the diversity in the school is incredible, and you know, many of them live in the area. Many of them have grown up in the area, but would never have come through the doors of Review Lane. And it reminds me a little bit about when I worked in the Arc. We used to say our doors are open to everyone, but not everybody will come through those doors. Some people need help to come through the doors, and that is what this project is doing. And you know, I'm kind of, because I feel like sometimes I'm a bit of an outlier in the arts, and I could really identify with the parents coming in, because it brought me back to that child coming into the National Gallery and not knowing. And even when I got older, actually, I was always interested, and I'd go to galleries, but I'd be conscious of how I'd be looking at something. Was I standing the right way? Had I got the right expression on my face when I was looking at a piece of art? Because lots of people do have certain expressions on their faces when they're looking at art. But what really surprised me was, I suppose, how comfortable the parents got very early on. And I think that's a mixture of things. I think, yeah, I'll come back to that in a minute. But the education team themselves, I kind of, you know, sometimes this work, I think you can work as an educator in an arts organisation and feel sometimes that your work gets lost. I'm not sure if that's the case, but I'm saying sometimes that can happen. But I spoke to the gallery staff, and the description of the education department was the heartbeat of the organisation. And I thought that was lovely. And Cleo and Jessica were described as the heartbeat of the education program. So for somebody to say that, I just thought that was so nice. And the way the attendants lit up when I asked them about the children, like one man said to me, I'm a cranky alpha, but he said, I can't pretend to be cranky when they come in, you know? And there is that realization of what it brings. It brings life to the gallery. And Helen spoke to me about it. Again, it's that scaffolding. It's everybody uniting around this. And like Helen talked about, the curator sitting with her and taking children's work seriously and honouring it. The technical staff just couldn't do enough. And I spoke to visitors as well about what they thought. Some international visitors, some home visitors. And there wasn't one visitor that didn't light up when they started talking about the exhibition and the importance of actually placing children right in the centre of the gallery, of that sense of ownership and the honouring of the work as well. The way it was presented was really, really important. Because, you know, too often, and it's down to finances as well, often that you go in you know, some community project and things are stuck up with blue tack or whatever. But for children to come and see their work on the walls of a gallery, I think is incredible. And this sense of hospitality, and I think that needs to be mentioned, because I think sometimes we forget about, you know, the role of hospitality and creativity, the role of hospitality in the arts world. And there was a real sense of hospitality when the children and their parents came in. And Alison, one of the, she's your creative coordinator, isn't that right? She said that every child had a parent here at one stage. And I noticed even there was the odd parent that maybe had to go to work, and there was somebody else with them, maybe an older sibling, that would take over and let them go to work. There was a granddad here one time. So it was very important to the parents too. And as you saw on the film, or if you haven't heard it, some of the parents came back themselves. So, I mean, that's really, really positive, that they felt welcome. And I think we forget sometimes about the welcome. You know, we're busy about, you know, a gallery is busy about its business, but this gallery doesn't forget about the welcome, actually. And you get that right through. And I think, you know, that role of hospitality it's percolating in my brain, and I'm just kind of wondering what to do with it. So so the children, one of the things I've noticed is that they're in interior and sensorial worlds. So marching to the beat of their own drum at this age, definitely. Primo Levi has a poem that I can't remember the name of, but he talks about every person you meet imprinting on you, and he talks about before the wax hardens, and these are definitely before the wax hardens. So every imprint, you know, positive or negative, is there. It's forming them. So to be part of something like this is just so special. Like for Helen to have that length of time putting these imprints on children, or allowing them to imprint themselves, and I actually, and I don't know if this is controversial or not, but it's something in my head. Like watching the children in the moment, was just, it was incredible. And I wonder, have we a right to try and find out what's going on in that moment for them? Is that, or have we a duty to make more of these engagements so that children can have that protected space to think whatever they want and to not have to tell us about it? Because that was one thing that I noticed. Helen never asked a child, nor did any of the educators, what are you drawing? What are you making? And the way, I remember when I had young kids, we were told to say, tell me about it, instead of what is it, because you had no idea what it was. So, it's just allowing them that freedom to do what they want, to make what they want. And as Mark was saying, it's just that those journeys that they'd forge, the patterns that they'd make with their artwork, but with their bodies. And there are so many languages in the preschool that a lot of the work happens noisily, but not exchanging language. And I would watch sometimes, and a child would be working away on their own, and then they would somehow go over to another child, and there would be an exchange without any language, and something would happen, and then they'd go back. And there was one little girl, I'm sure you remember this girl, Helen, who kind of was nearly painting to China, because she had, she was working collaboratively, which again is very difficult for children that age. That is not something that they do naturally. So there was a lot of the parallel play, but it was really interesting when they came together and almost negotiated the space. But there was one little girl, and she was just painting and painting and painting, getting more water and painting and painting and painting. And eventually the paper started to disintegrate. And she kept at it. And at one stage, Helen suggested that there was more paper here she'd like to go. And she went over to be polite, I think, for a second. And then she was back to doing this. So there was this gigantic hole. But that was obviously important. And I don't know why, but it just was a magical moment. And the languages, as I say, the exchange, it's so fascinating, how the communication takes place and how the negotiations over colours, over what space they wanted to be in. It was fascinating. And as I say, I'm still working on this, and I have nearly more questions, which is probably freaking you out, Jessica and Leo. I nearly have more questions than answers at this point. But in a way, that's the way it should be, because we can't ever really know what's going on for the children. But the perseverance as well, took a lot of perseverance, from parents and from children, or from parents and for the educators, because there were some children who were afraid at the beginning. They were afraid of the new space in their school, going up the stairs. They were afraid of the materials that were put in front of them. And for them to see them travelling a journey, there wasn't one who wasn't engaging in some way by the end of it. There was a little boy, you see, with the numbers there, and that's his hyper-focus, and that's his passion, numbers and letters. But Helen accommodated that, because he wasn't, for whatever reason, he wasn't interested, or he didn't want to engage in the painting or in the construction. The construction was brilliant, because there were kids kind of with gaffer tape pulling it off with their teeth, and it really looked like, they were building. But also just the materials, because those boxes went on to be used for the summer camps. And Alison said to me, they got another outing last week, and they're only gone now because they've fallen apart. But that's something that schools can do. They can use things like that. It's not expensive, but it's just, I suppose, the perseverance and the imagination. I'm probably running over time, am I?
No, you're okay.
Yeah. Okay. So the materials, there was an abundance of materials, and Helen thought of every sensory need for a child. everything that would develop their imagination, I suppose it was nurturing every sense of the child. And she was like Mary Poppins. I never knew what was going to come out of the bag. But yeah, it was just, and things you wouldn't even think of. When they were in the, I think you'll see it downstairs when they were in, or you might have photographs, when they were in the boxes with the little lights and all of that. And I am missing slides here. I don't know what's going on. Oh no, there. So anyway, reflections. I think when something is this good, we have to start thinking about legacy. What is the legacy? How do we continue this? And I know your minds are on that in the education department. One of the things I think that needs to be addressed, this is a wider kind of thing, is training in early years pedagogy, training in the arts, because that is the universal kind of access for children, getting it in school as a right, as nothing special, as a right. And I think, you still go into schools now, mainly primary schools, and paper plate art has been replaced by Pinterest. And everybody can make the same, and it's great. But I think the confidence for primary school teachers to be taught in college, still, people are cutting out shapes and sticking things on instead of developing their own relationship with creativity. Mentorship, it's a big ask for Helen to be kind of holding this space. And I think, we need to be looking at ways of cloning Helen, basically, or somebody learning from Helen. And long-term funding, I mean, that's the thing that stops us all the time. The role of the evaluator, it's a luxury in many ways. Many projects can't afford an evaluator. And often, I suppose, it's a privilege and it's a luxury, because to be able to watch children like this, I've had the best year. It's been absolutely amazing. Assumptions. There was one little boy that had a really, really distressed visit to the gallery, the first one. And his mum nearly wasn't going to bring him back. She thought he had been traumatised by it and everything. And I really was anxious to speak to her, because by the end of it, on the last day here, he was flying around the gallery. He was running. He was just enjoying. The joy was pouring out of him. And it turned out that he has some needs. One of them is language processing, which he would never really say anything to you. So he didn't really tell you what was wrong. But it turned out it was the echo in the gallery when he came in. It was the noise that we don't think of, really. We think of them as nice, quiet spaces. But that's what set the ball rolling that day. And he just could not relax to it. And it's funny, because I spoke to one of the staff, and he said he comes down the stairs and he hears the noise of the children echoing up through the room, and it just gladdens his heart. And so, there's two completely different takes on it. And then the barriers, as Mark has said, we shy away from it, but there still is class in the arts, and we really are afraid to talk about it. Projects like this go a long way to breaking down barriers, because it's that sense of entitlement. This is your place. You deserve to be here. And I think that's really, really vitally important for parents. And, there's little point in some ways. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. There is always point in engaging with children, but you have to bring their parents along with them. And I think that's what was lovely. It was that sense of inclusion and welcoming. So defining successes, I'm finished now, so you can all breathe a sigh of relief and have your coffee. Defining success, I think sometimes because we're trying to justify the arts all the time. And this is, I find this so bloody annoying, actually. I did a master's a couple of years, and the texts that we were still being given was, if children have access to the arts, they'll be better at maths. They'll be better at their literacy. Nobody says that about sport. During the pandemic, when everything closed, RTE were playing hurling matches that happened years ago. Do you know, like, it makes you think about the priorities that we have in this country. Pilot projects. The Arkling project that I worked on was a 6-year pilot project. So we're littered with pilot projects telling us the same thing, that this work is good, that children benefit from this, that teachers benefit from it, that their parents benefit from it, and we're still trying to justify it. The language, Mark talked about Reggio Emilio and the 100 languages of children, and the magic that happens. And even if they're just subtle little shifts, because I think sometimes we're forced into making these grandiose claims, but you know, that little boy that kind of entered the gallery terrified, that suddenly had ownership of the gallery at the end of the project, that's success. But how do we measure that in some ways? How do we communicate that to funders? We are trying to describe the 100 languages of children in our one limited language. We're trying to describe what happened. And I suppose that's why I have so many questions, because so many amazing things happened. And how do you translate that into just plain language? Outrage. Where is our sense of outrage as a community? Because we are proving ourselves over and over and over again. And I'll admit, I'm old. 30 years of doing this, and I'm fed up justifying it. But then the thing that keeps us going is the joy. It's just that, like, I heard a phrase a week or two ago called putting ourselves in the path of joy. And I thought, that's what we do. That's what I'm doing when I'm turning up session after session in this. I am putting myself in the path of joy. And Mark here is putting himself in the path of joy. This is Mark running around with his umbrella. But we had fun. And I think, Cleo, you talked about joy. We all talk about joy. And I think it's that keeps us going, that enrichment, that joy, that sense of fun that early years children have. But if they're treated right, teenagers can still have that. Adults can still have that, you know, that passion. But it is about somehow making it equal and, you know, encouraging people to be outraged that they don't have an entitlement to this as a rule. I'm finished. Sorry.
So in terms of introducing Helen, I don't think she needs any introduction, does she? She is a visual artist, inventor, and classically trained dancer. Helen's practice is imbued with the responses and stimuli discovered through direct engagement in providing and developing multidisciplinary arts experiences with and for others. The collaborative process is what drives her practice, and the early year child is her ideal co-creator. The synergy created by using a cross-disciplinary approach provides a sensorium palette from which she draws from. Helen's ambition is to create interactive artworks and experiences with and for all early years children that stimulate and support curiosity, agency, independent learning and play, whilst striving to ensure that the work remains sustainable within the same critical and aesthetic platform of professional arts spheres. Helen has been awarded several bursaries, residencies and commissions for her work with early years. And from the Arts Council, the 4 local authorities, Dublin local authorities and Creative Ireland. The National Concert Hall is supporting her development of Sculptunes, a series of interactive sound installations for all early years audiences. Her project, Article 12, Empowering Very Young Voices Through the Arts, was delivered in partnership with the Central Remedial Clinic Preschool, the Hugh Lane Gallery, the National Concert Hall, Visual Art Centre and DLR Arts Office, on Thorn Arts Centre and Swift Cultural Centre. That's one hell of an amount of partners, Helen. Managing those partners. Whew. Article was supported through the Arts Council's Project Award. So without further ado, we'll hand over to Helen.
I was going to put some shark music from Jaws on it. The week after the exhibition opened, I did a course called the Circle of Security, which was funded through TUSLA, and it's specifically for parents and I suppose, and they're developing relationships with their children and ensuring to try to how we have more emotionally secure children. And if you can give your child or your baby, I suppose, earlier child, 100%, 30% of the time, you will have an emotionally secure child. If you give them 70% of your time, 100% of the time, you will not have an emotionally secure child. And it was just absolutely brilliant. And it was just very timely that I did it just when we had finished this. It was a very intensive course. It's an American qualification. And they work a lot with parents who would have suffered trauma or addiction issues. And it's about bonding and relationship building with children. And often, and I suppose it refers to something a bit later on when I'm talking about children and earlier children who live in the city. And they're surrounded by concrete and the traffic and the noise, and that most of the time and it would have been good to play the shark music if I was to play the Jaws shark music, all of us, your hair stands up. And that for so often when we were with our children, we hear that music and our fears trigger something, a risk that probably is not there. And we often stop our children from exploring, from being curious. And it was just a really interesting kind of take or understanding of figuring out who we are and how much our childhood imposes and restricts our own children. But if I would recommend it comes up again, the Circle of Security training. It's a fantastic training to do. Okay, let me... Oh, I printed this really big and I hope I wouldn't have to wear my glasses, but I can't see it. I think I need to go back to the opticians. Yeah, so I've called this pause, pace, and present. And rather than giving this sort of going through it in chronological order of what we've done, I think I've had a lot of the summer to be able to actually kind of stop and just think through and question and rationalize a lot of what we did over the last academic year. And much of what I'm going to talk about is really from the artist perspective, because I know kind of Mark and Bernadette will give a lot of the insights from the educators and from the children's perspective. And I was really keen to give it a much more kind of put on the conversation, the dialogue about the artistic element of things. Yeah. So actually, I actually ended up kind of writing an essay. So I have some bullet points as we go along, but I'm going to actually read it from this. And hopefully it'll keep me focused because I'm terrible for wandering off on all sorts of tangents. So hang on. What button do I press? Is it this one? Nope. Hang on. Oh, there I have it. Got it. Nope. Yeah. That one? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, reflecting on the academic year with Holy Child Preschool has benefited from frequent visits into the exhibition. Once I got over kind of the dropping in to check that all the logistics of it worked, I had the time then to just sit and to be with the exhibition and to be surrounded by it and listen to it whilst watching the interaction of those who visited across all ages. It takes time to kind of to let the process and the working of it kind of like fall away, a bit like kind of wearing a coat or overalls, and how you can kind of take it off and put it aside. And then once all of those things are done, you can kind of sit and look. And then throughout the summer, I took a break. And then on returning and having a look at the exhibition, it kind of felt like it was done by somebody else. And I wonder about other artists when you've seen your work and it's there when you go off and you do other things and you come back and you kind of go, oh, I did that. I forgot. It was me. It wasn't somebody else. And sometimes, and I wondered to other artists, Jane, possibly that happens. Yeah. And then I suppose when I came in then, and it was when I first came back after being away for a few weeks, a lot of the gallery attendants came up and really expressed how much they enjoyed when they got, because throughout the whole building, the gallery attendants get moved to different locations, and they said they really enjoyed being scheduled to be near the exhibition, that they liked seeing the interaction and being able to go in and assist people. And there's in the middle of there's a tetrahedron piece, and one of the gallery assistants came because he wanted me to show him how to put it together, because he wanted to help some of the smaller children to play in that. And that's really, really nice when I arrive in and the gallery attendants are smiling and welcoming me, as opposed to going, oh Jesus, not her again. What it's like that, on making their daily lives even harder. Then I suppose it enabled me then, when I can look at it more objectively and cast a more critical eye over it. And I am pleasantly delighted that I think the aesthetic is strong and it holds its own. And looking at the work, the boundaries are beautifully blurred, and with some of the marks I've made in a lot of those big paintings, and some of them it's with that the children have made, and it works really well, and it doesn't matter and who did what. It just happens to work. And some of the marks are really spontaneous, and others are, I suppose, more considered. But overall, the works were owned by, and the marks are made by all the individual children, not with very little guidance and direction really from me. And that took a certain length of involvement, engagement with the children to be able to stand back more and to allow them to do it. And I suppose, and I suppose I would mention at this point, I'm a complete control freak. And like things like when my kids do the Christmas tree at home when they go to bed, I redo it. And it must be a nightmare to live with, because I'm the person in the relationship who rearranges the dishwasher because somebody hasn't put it in right. And that kind of thing, which some people find infuriating, but for me, I need to do that kind of thing. So letting go and allowing the children go off and do stuff. At times I find that really challenging. I have to go, no, you're just being control freak, just stand back a bit. And I'm conscious too in the room that there will be people from an arts perspective, there will be people from the community, there will be educators, and there would be, I suppose, what's represented here would be also early years educators. So in some of these points, I'm hoping that the various things I mentioned will be relevant to whatever sector people are actually from. And so I suppose I've just taken key individual things. And my methodology and approach reflects many of the key objectives of ASTER, the National Curriculum Framework for Early Childhood in Ireland. So a lot of the points, it was good that I got to hear Bernadette and Mark, because a lot of what I'm referencing will actually refer to what things that they have mentioned as well. I believe that each of us holds our own narrative, so I don't need to bring a story, but what I bring are the props to express and support this narrative to grow and to be heard. Sometimes I bring an abstract concept, often informed by the materials themselves, or something I might be at early stages experimenting with in the studio, and by bringing some experiments in to working with early years, they often do things that with what I have brought that I would have never in a million years thought. And it also allows me to know what not to use in terms of health and safety, which is it has a huge impact onto what I can do and what I can bring, right down to the work downstairs. I have discovered that if the pieces, I use a lot of the plumbing piping, but if I use wood or metal piping, I wouldn't get insurance for it. But if I was a plumber, an actual plumber, I would get a discount on my insurance, which I thought was kind of interesting. Early years children think and do everything with every pore of their body, and I would still, even as an adult, see myself as a kinetic learner, and that's what early years children are. And I think that's probably why I'm drawn to working with that age group, because a lot of the time we don't need to talk, we're just being with each other, and a raised eyebrow or a stamp of the foot or an expression is enough to know what's going on. That sometimes I think that talking is totally overrated, and a raised eyebrow can say an awful lot more about what's actually going on. And then my ambition is to create immersive and playful experiences and environments that give a sense of agency whilst being able to stand equal within the same critical and aesthetic platforms of professional art spheres. And then around agencies, from my observations in earlier settings, giving agency is embedded into the methodologies used across all earlier settings. The external actions of choice made by a child, for example, choosing whether or not to take off their coat by themselves or deciding what they will eat, also has a deeply nourishing internal impact. The child may not be reflecting consciously, but being able to action their choices and decisions can ensure that we are providing a strong base for self-worth and self-esteem to flourish and grow. And I suppose that the way I would work with children, I like to kind of embrace that thinking that there's always choices that the children could make the whole time, and that is so important to the child, that they feel that they have that agency themselves to action their ideas and thoughts. Asking questions. Once all of the consuming process of being involved in something, be that the process of hosting the sessions with the children or curating and hanging the exhibition, can be put aside, then only I can really stop and understand what and how things took shape and why. From the outset, I knew I wanted to focus on another element to this residency. This is our second long-term residency with the Hugh Lane. The first one was with Osmond House on Mountjoy Square. And Susan Menton Curtis was the evaluator, and Susan would be an expert in early years methodology, and she does a lot of lecturing in around early years. And the evaluation, I suppose it took an in-depth look at where and how creativity supports the aims and objectives across many different early years curricula. Like she had curricula that I had never even knew existed. But a lot of it I was familiar with. But she offered me a new way to articulate what it is that I do in this context. She provided me with insights to my own practice that I was not aware of. So I was able, I suppose, then going forward, being able to talk to early years settings and knowing more so how I could, I suppose, articulate something so that they would see how it would work in their context. And then I wanted to articulate better the artistic and this time, the artistic and aesthetic journey. I wanted to place a focus on engagement with creative and culture as a right in itself, without always having to place it in context of other practices. I work on several projects at the same time. So another project I was working on, and it was called Article 12, which is empowering very young voices to the arts. And that was based on the United Nations Rights of the Child, Article 12, but also Articles 23, and in particular Article 31. And that is to be immersed in art and creativity for its own sake. So up there I have kind of Article 31 focuses on the right of children to play, rest and participate in cultural and artistic life. Children should have access to and be encouraged to participate in cultural and artistic activities for it in themselves. That sometimes it's inevitable when you have different stakeholders involved and the funding needs to come in, you have to tick so many boxes for so many different places. And sometimes I feel that, well, even you can, so maybe someone's going back to something that Bernadette was saying, like that creativity is a bit tired at this point, that like creativity, people should be allowed to do it just to be creative. And they shouldn't always be, well, why should they do it and how should it benefit them? But just because it is just good for you, just don't do it, and not always having to explain it and justify it. And then also Article 12 used the Lundy model of participation, which Bernadette referred to ensure that the voice of the child was heard and had influence. Now, we didn't document it. It was only at the very end, Bernadette and I spoke about the Lundy model of participation, but in the Article 12, we actually documented the impact of and how we used it each stage of the way on using the Lundy model of participation as a guidance for working on that project. Now, that project was done with the CRC, the Central Remedial Clinic, so it was specifically around children with physical disabilities and additional needs. So we had to, I suppose, micro inspect everything as we went along, because sometimes in the CRC, I might be lying on a floor with a child and their blinking will dictate to me how much they're enjoying it, and you're watching it at a very different basis. So in that context, it's almost easier to be able to and we had the time of almost 18 months to do it piece by piece. on it. But it would be interesting to use creativity as a way of showcasing in practice the London model of education, participation, because it is you can have all your templates and everything else, but to actually see it in action would be brilliant to be able to do. Yeah. Yeah. Relationships. We talk about the triangular relationship between the early years children, the early years educators, and the artists. And there's always that kind of diagram that how those three entities are really important. But I think there's actually a fourth element in the relationship. But a square doesn't really has corners that I always visualize in my head that people are turning their back, they're being sent to the corner, so that doesn't work. But I was thinking more of a Triskel, or is it something called a Valknut, where you have the embedded triangles on top of each other, but they're all connected and they create the spiraling thing all along. Would be a better image that describes the aesthetic element or energy that we create together. And that's that journey. As an artist, the aesthetic element is real. It is tangible. It is a living, breathing entity that changes. It too grows and develops in parallel to all relationships. And I will refer to it again later, but the earliest child, nothing is an inanimate object. Everything feels or causes feelings, whether it is real or imagined. The aesthetic process and outcome is intrinsically part of all of us in the collaboration and evolves within us and outside of us, and yet requires an individual reflection on what and why we are doing what it is that we were doing, yet it responds from our actioning together. Together we are absorbed in the process of exploring, mark making, being spontaneous or considered as we express ourselves, playing out the narrative we all carry in our heads, or putting it aside for a little while and getting caught up in the moment. This narrative we need to push outside ourselves and explore for ourselves rather than for others. This allows us to know who we are, and from here we go out into the world. And I think that's what happens to an artist in an artist studio, given the time and space to think through what is going through their heads. Or that experimenting and the exploration. And what happens in the studio will cause growth and change in ourselves. And I suppose that a lot of the time I find that the emphasis, and again referring to something Bernadette you had said around when the child is in that space and we want to know what it is that they're doing, or should we know? And I believe that most of the time the earlier child is encouraged to speak, to be able to communicate with somebody else. And I think the most important relationship, like anybody would have, would be with the one for themselves. So the child, to me, the emphasis should be on allowing the child and encouraging the child to be able to communicate with themselves, to explore their own narrative in different ways and through different forms of expression for themselves, not for anybody else. And I think that if a child has explored their inner thoughts themselves through play, through creativity, then that embeds a deep understanding of themselves and where they can hold themselves, and that builds self-esteem and self-worth. And then from there, once they are the center point, they're reaching out and they're going out. Whereas if that isn't embedded in the child and that is insecure, then the child is almost seen as flitting and they're unsure of who they are and what their thoughts are. And that to me would be quite a struggle for a child going further on. It would be if you can embed that I suppose that self-esteem and that sense of agency from as early as possible. I think they have they're the crucial things for a child to really develop and to go forward. And then the relationship between the teachers, the SNAs, the children, the parents, the caretakers, the chefs in the school, as well, the gallery staff, the managers, the evaluators, and the artists, that everybody's role is valuable. And when this is recognized, the overall experience becomes more worthwhile and more meaningful. And I had some great conversations with the caretaker in the mornings. He'd come and he'd move all the tables for me because there would be breakfast in the canteen before I would get there. And they'd be sticking bits of butter, under the children would have butter and they'd stick it under their hands, and you find all these lumps of butter under the table. And then there was also the women in the kitchen who would come in and out because they make the food for the children and drop it to the classrooms. And they usually had the radio on, and then one day I noticed the children were being distracted by the radio, and they were caught up in the songs and stuff. And so I went and I said, perhaps we turn off the radio? So, and they did. And then each time for the session, they would turn it down so that they weren't, and they were, and it was just interesting because there was different people in the kitchen, and some of them were more interested in knowing what we were doing. And you could sense there was one person who was really interested in it, and one of the women was really not particularly interested, and was, I think, perhaps under a little pressure some days. And the children sensed what they were coming in to collect boxes in the room, and the children, you could see they would sense who was in and out. And I think they do. They pick up on everything. And whether it's just, I think we emanate stuff from our pores, and earlier children pick that up really fast. You can't fake it with them. You've got to be honest, because they'll put it to you if you're not. The garden and other important spaces. The environment that we create in is extremely important to the overall process. We were so lucky to have the opportunity to have a space of our own. The huge space of the canteen, a space with a natural light flooding in, devoid of the usual classroom toys and items that distract the children, though in saying that the children initially, when they're in their own rooms, are much more confident because they're familiar with the space. After the initial visit, because on the very first time I visited, I visited all of the classrooms, and I brought my bug collection in, which it's enthralling to the children, and they're slightly freaked out, so that they're far better behaved. They'll focus. And it's really interesting that the boys are usually more freaked out than the girls when it comes to the big scary insects. And generally some teachers will have to leave the room because they can't cope with the giant bugs and insects I have. And so I get the children straight off. And this is, I suppose, giving the children a role and giving them a sense of purpose, that before I open the boxes and show them my collection of bugs and insects, that they have to mind the adults in the room, because some of the adults won't be able to deal with the giant spiders. And so they mind the adults in the room. And straight away, then that brings up the children's value and who they have a purpose, they have a role, that their being there has something other than just looking. Each space needs elements of familiarity each week. And I suppose, yeah, as Mark, I have a sound nest, and we play that at the beginning of every single session, and then that would move to, and we play it in the Hugh Lane. So wherever we go, we start with using the sound nest. And then this routine, I mean, it reduces the anxiety, and it's offering them something familiar, and so it builds confidence in them, so that wherever we go, that they know that they should be there. It is also important to action. It was also important to action and reciprocate the visits to the children and the educators by seeing the children in their spaces as well, and going into the classroom and into the garden. And sometimes Tamal and I joined the children as they ate their lunch, and we watched the children take their responsibilities seriously when it came to their turn to give everyone a yogurt, to give out the plate, to the drinks, and to ask them, do you want a spoonful of something or other? And it's just brilliant to watch how and they take that role so seriously. It's fantastic to see that. And then we also joined the children in the garden. And initially, I suppose at the beginning, we wanted to. I had a voice recorder, and I recorded the children shouting and talking and playing their games. I was almost finished already. Oh my God, sorry. And in kind of adult. Yeah, and sometimes I suppose I had the opportunity in the garden to talk with a lot of the early years educators who gave more insights into the children. And there we learned that a lot of the children, the only outdoor space they had was the garden in Holy Child. And that a lot of our own, I suppose, fears about how the children interact and engage in an outdoor space are coming from our own fears, rather than allowing the children to be themselves. Oh my, I must have gone off on all sorts of tangents. I'll try to get let's skip on to okay. The group seems bigger than normal, and I found remembering all the names of the children challenging. I didn't know much about the children, their individual context, the specific requirements. We just got straight into things. Initially, it was hard because I thought I needed to know more about being the children, but actually not knowing gave a much more even playing field. And because we were in a space that didn't that was new and it wasn't in the classroom. I think that allowed the children that opportunity to be somebody else if they wanted to be, to experiment more with their interactions and how they got on with everybody else. Okay. No, I did way too much thinking. Yeah. I suppose one key thing that came out was that idea. I went back to the studio with lots of ideas and questions. Was about as an artist, you want to be the artist, but there's also you're facilitating, and when does that stop and start? Because sometimes I used to feel that I was there at the beginning and the end, and I was missing the enjoyment of the process and the engaging part of it. So. And I started thinking about how can I be the artist, because the children see adults, they see children, and they see artists. They do see artists as a slightly different kind of entity. And that's my fantastic studio at the NCH, where I built sculptures. These were, I suppose, these are samples of all the different activities and things that I would bring. And all of these have been devised and developed with early years children over the last 10 or 15 years. And then the toolkit. Oh, these are the pipettes. This is, I think, when the things stopped and I changed, because I was going from delivering things each session, bringing something new and what was coming out of the bag, and then realizing when the children had these pipettes, they were the dexterity was challenging for them to do it. But when we did it, there was total silence. And they were so determined to get it and to master it. And they so enjoyed achieving it. And we did, where I picked up the pipettes and the brushes and the marks, and I got much more involved in the process with the children, and I enjoyed it more and felt that I was being the artist and allowed the artist to take over, as opposed to always feeling the person who was facilitating it. Have I got less than 1 minute left?
Your grant, it would maybe 1 to 2.
Okay.
I don't want to touch on.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying the most.
Yeah. All right.
Otherwise,
well, I probably could print this off and read my essay. Yeah. The fine line. Yeah, the fine line between being an artist and an artist facilitator. And I think what really helped to shape this was the culture within Holy Child Preschool, whether intentionally or not. Mark ambition for a Reggio Emilia atelier type of experience had filtered through a school. It was already out there in the ether well before myself and Tamara arrived in. And I think the staff understood what that idea was, and because we had this idea of a studio space, and that gradually the sessions, it was no longer 40 minutes or 50 minutes, and we ended up having these open-ended entire mornings for one group. So that, like, when an artist is in a studio and you're busy doing something and you get to the point where you say, oh, I know, you know when it's finished because it just is. And it's like every pore in your body that tells you. You can't articulate it, but you just know it's done. And when you have that open-ended experience for the children in that context, when they're done and they know it. And they're ready to sit aside and do something over in the corner without interfering with anything else. And I think that's really important, to allow the children that time to be finished when they're finished. And I know it's a luxury to be able to do that, and it doesn't always happen. And then there was a whole piece on the aesthetic of it. I'll read it very quickly. Looking at the critical and aesthetic call and how to curate the work for an interactive public show, the exhibition spaces for children are not a space, I believe, for just holding them away from the real artwork. That the exhibition should be real for them. The exhibition is more than a space to be entertained. The interactive elements invite the understanding the early years children need to use a multiplicity of senses to interpret and understand what they are being presented with. I needed to ensure that the aesthetic palette used within the space was of equal measure that would be used in any curator's approach to an exhibition. Curating for early years would demand that I slow the pace and be clear in using informed and considered choices in determining where and what is placed and how. Like, it was really important that we kept white walls, that it couldn't in any shape or form look anything like Funky Monkeys, because there would be absolute mayhem. And it's important that the gallery attendants are the interface between the public. And what I don't want was the absolute dread on their faces. I don't want to make their life any harder. And they did an amazing job. And I spoke to lots of them and listened to how and they did express how at times when you have to go up and you go to somebody, can you play with it gently, or can you do something? The parent will turn around and you'll get dismissed, and it's really hard. And I've worked as a gallery attendant, and it's you're like dismissed as if you don't exist, and it's really hard. But I spent time talking to them and listening to them, and I've watched like the way that the public have interacted with the space is absolutely incredible. There's been so little damage, and I know it's interactive, so there's an element, and I learned how better to control some of that interaction without being overly precious about the work, that I by changing little things to enable that to happen. Hang on, I think there's another picture there. Yeah. Looking at the aesthetic, the dynamic, and the way the colors, I've deliberately, the curation, the way the color is done, it moves from one color into the next gradually. If all those color things had been put sporadically all over the place, that impacts how the children behave in the space. And by giving them that gradual tonal change, it curtails that very much so in the space. And I needed to make sure, and then also that the photographs as well, the children can see themselves. And the photographs, they show some of the activities, but they really show as well the children for who the children are. And a lot of the early years educators take the photographs for us because the children don't perform in the way they would do as anybody else coming in for a photograph. So you really get a really fantastic view and the real spontaneous reactions of the children. And again, I'd like to thank the Hugh Lane again for just how I feel I have been treated. And like the art handling team of people I get, those are people who hang the Andy Warhol and Alvin Ivrian, and it's just, nothing is too much trouble. And it's absolutely fantastic to be able to work and present groups of work for early years children that has been made with them and for them, that has been given a gallery and is part of the main programme of a gallery, as opposed to a lot of the time it's a back corridor, or you can have the foyer for a couple of days. And I think that I'd like to say thank you so much for that. That's been absolutely fantastic. And there was probably lots of other bits and pieces, but I've run way over time. And I went through touch. Yeah, I suppose I think I had a last sentence or two. Yeah, I wanted to ensure that the artwork is respected by all. The photographs depict the children both to demonstrate the activity, but also to show them who they are. What I want to do is to meet the children where they are at. So perhaps this support to understand how to be, it would also perhaps support them to how to be in the gallery space. They need to learn that. And if as soon as they go in anywhere and you say, don't touch, they're immediately going to touch everything. So by allowing them to touch things, they gradually learn how and when it's appropriate to touch and when it's not. That this is a space for them and curated with content that is relevant to their lives, and so that they too are part of the making and influencing of culture. And that was touch, and then that was some thank yous. Yeah, and I didn't say thank you to Tamal, who was there every week with me as well, and it was just brilliant to have the support of another artist with me on that. So thank you very much.
I'm going to move us quickly because I want to introduce you to Jane. Jane's a Cork-based artist. She's a visual artist. She's creating new and innovative work for early years audiences. Her multi-award winning practice is grounded in visual arts, shaped by her experience as a mother of 3 young boys and rooted in the real and imaginary worlds of early childhood, or imagined worlds of early childhood. Jane produces technically accomplished, conceptually rich work that reflects the physical, playful ways young children engage with art. Recent projects include Home Sweet Home in 2023 and First Impressions in 2025, both touring nationally. A member of Sample Studios, her practice is supported by the Arts Council and Cork City Council. So I'm going to hand you over to Jane. And this was a format that Cleo came up with last year, where we had somebody not from the project present. So really welcome, Jane, because I know you're stepping into this space of all things local, national, and all sorts of things going on. So, but it's great to have you here to hear about your practice and your journey so far.
Thank you so much. It's a real privilege to be here today and to get to be part of this really rich conversation. I've been a huge fan of Helen's work For a long time, I stalked her on Instagram, and I could sit and listen to Helen talk all day long. She has an incredibly rich practice and an energy that those of us that know her and know her practice realize is not. It's beyond normal. It's incredible, and I continue to look to her for inspiration. And it's a privilege to be here today and to celebrate what I feel is such an incredible project, Boghanna Báistí Beaga. So thank you to the Hugh and to Cleo for inviting me along to be part of it. And what excites me, I suppose, so much about the exhibition itself is the way that it's bringing to the surface and the imaginative worlds of very young children. And it's allowing those worlds to be seen and to be heard and to be celebrated in a gallery space, on the gallery floor, a real gallery floor, you know, not in the back corridor. And this feels like a really important and incredibly important gesture, and one that I think sets a precedent for how young audiences can be present within a gallery setting. I'm going to be plugging that along in this presentation because it's something I believe strongly in. So for almost 10 years now, my practice has been dedicated to early years audiences. And I suppose that initial focus came from my work with Babro International Arts Festival for Children in Galway. Some of you may be familiar with. I have had the privilege of working with them in Galway between 2016 and 2020-ish. And continue to have a really rich relationship with them. And seeing the work there for young audiences, and in particular, for the first time seeing work, now that would have been largely performance art, so theatre and dance for early years audiences, just blew my mind. And I wanted to be part of that world, and I wanted to dedicate my practice to that, and have done so. I became a mum then myself in 2018 to lovely Luke, my little boy, and I suppose just seeing him and the world that he was occupying, his imagination, his curiosity, and a just unique way of viewing the world compounded that interest and excitement for me. And then we had another little boy in 2020, that kind of tricky time for everybody. So over that period of time before Oisín was born, I had been doing a lot of, I suppose my practice was largely facilitation. It was commissions largely with arts and educational institutes and cultural institutes. I worked in settings and I did outreach, and that was the world I was occupying. But I could feel like there was a niche and there was a desire to kind of shift gears a bit. And like so many of us, we kind of threw everything up in the air when COVID came. And I really decided that I wanted to dedicate my practice to making work for early years audiences for the gallery floor. So the work I make is not educational in nature anymore, because it's great freedom in just throwing that out, because so much of what Helen was saying was resonating with me around, you know, having to include that language around the education and around what, you know, early childhood developmental needs this project is going to hit on. But my work, and there is absolutely the space for that, and there is amazing examples for that. But my work is not about that anymore. It's not about teaching or illustrating something, but I try to develop complex and carefully fabricated artworks that invite very young children and their families or their carers to encounter them as an audience, and in the same way that any of us would encounter visual art, I suppose. My boys are very much they're my research partners. You know, I remember initially when I kind of reached out to try and move into this area more so, I was talking about focus groups in my applications, and I was doing this and that. I have 3 small boys. I was like, there's no way in hell I'd be lucky to kind of make the artwork. And I used to kind of, leave it a bit vague, I suppose, as to who the children I was using as my research were, but they were my 3 early years boys. And I suddenly embraced that. I was like, there's a real richness and a depth to what's going on in our world as a family, and it has a place to be communicated and expressed and received by an audience in its own right. And I don't kind of hide that anymore. I celebrate it, and I also do so very much in the knowledge that there will come a time that that won't be the case. And I will have to go to the focus groups and reach back out to other young children. So I suppose the research centres, my research centres very much on the voice of the child. So although I am, my work, you know, is intended from the onset to be in a gallery setting, the children are not to me just seen as the audience. In the end, they are present right throughout the research process and the development of the work, and they inform my work in profound ways. And I'll go on to show you kind of some examples of how I do include them. I suppose it's a bit much to say like practicing principles, but there's a couple of key things that kind of guide my work and kind of keep me on track, because it is such an exciting space to work in, and it's really great. There's a huge energy around it at the moment, and there's lots of opportunities, thankfully. But I just kind of, there's a couple of key things that I say, this is kind of what I'm trying to achieve or whatever, and I just kind of go through some of that with you now. So, as I said, being in Barbaro was a huge influence, and what really kind of struck me was that very young children, babies and toddlers, were in the proper cultural spaces, experiencing a work that had been made to the highest level for them, with them in mind. They were in the theatres, they were in, you know, Druid theatre, they were brought in and respected the way you and I would be in a theatre space. And I was always kind of asking, like, is that happening in visual arts world? Are young people being not just, is there exposure to visual art on the main programme of a gallery? Or is it just, and I don't say there is a place for that, but in the education and outreach aspect? How do early years children encounter artists? It's visual artists. It is usually in the form of workshops or on that front. And so it was about believing that there is a space for young people to be in these cultural spaces. And that's why we're celebrating what's down below us today. The other thing, I suppose, that was just brilliant, I think, in Barbaro was I learned about this whole idea that they would try and teach or educate the adults in an audience, be it the teachers coming in or whatever, the parents, that we won't be shushing the children. You know, if they're in a theatre performance, and we're not going to say, shh, because if they have an outburst or they ask a question, that is them engaging with the work. That's exactly what the artistic team want. They want, they know that that's the child engaging with what's in front of them. And so I knew if I were to present work in a gallery setting, I would have to reject the don't touch the artwork approach, of course, just as Helen has acknowledged, that could never be the case, and that my aim would always be to create works that are visually engaging, but also allow for safe touch and whole body connection, if that's how a child chooses to engage. And I suppose that principle sits at the core of my practice. And, you know, it's funny, you said it too, Helen, you know, health and safety, robustness and durability have just come, like, that's my work. You have to make work that withstands all of those things. And there's really careful consideration and dedication to making the work that allows for that. But, you know, I was blessed to become a boy mum, 3 boys. So there was another one came in there somewhere along the way. So we have Oisín, Cormac and Luke, and they're 3, 5 and 7. And gee, I couldn't ask for better people to find the vulnerabilities in my pieces. I just love this image. It was very early on. Don't worry, I was never naive enough. It was only a mock-up to think that might survive. But I love Oisín as our middle guy, and boy, does he find the vulnerabilities in anything that I make. He's super. And so the children, they're right there through that process. I invite them into my studio space up in Sample Studios in Cork to kind of road test things. And I talk about how seeing children with the works in the gallery space also feeds back. So one of the other things that's kind of a challenge for me, really, actually, this is a kind of an outcome of those very early sessions in up in the studio. One of the kind of really challenging things for me is like kind of that my work is, I try and kind of tell myself again, my work is first and foremost visual, and that's a space I'm kind of trying to occupy and explore and push and see what are the limits and the possibilities around that. Because there's lots of wonderful experiences available to young people today, from immersive play environments, sensory rooms, and so on. And all aspects play a hugely important role. But I want to challenge, can we present, say, for example, just like Baba House here, a purely sculptural piece that will still connect with an audience in a meaningful way? And I think its quietness is important. It resists, I suppose, sometimes I have to try and get or test at least, does my work have to resist the temptation to become purely interactive, and instead that it situates the work firmly in the language of contemporary visual art, and it's still being deeply accessible to early years. And I'll talk about this piece and how I've seen that kind of unfold. There's Helen's work opens up one set of incredible possibilities, but quieter, maybe sculptural work can open up another. And together, I suppose, what's really interesting is, with the support of institutes and other funders and so on, that together they demonstrate the breadth of what art for very young children can be. And we really have to continue pushing that and exploring that. So my practice would have been largely rooted in photography and sculpture. But it's really expanded kind of over the last couple of years due to generosity and supports, and I work with collaborators. So I suppose my mind is always alight at how I'm going to bring a certain idea or theme or idea, all of which has usually come from my children, to life in the gallery space. And as I said, durability and safety is such a thing that I have engaged with, really skilled technicians, other artists and musicians to help me in this process. And so this is a piece I'm collaborating on at the moment with Cadogan Rugs in Wexford, and it's just finished. It'll be a really, really special piece. These are really large-scale rugs that are to be shown alongside an animation that I've created, and it will be shown as part of Babaro next year. But the ideas will always continue to be road tested with the children as we go along. Now as I kind of expand and collaborate with other people, that's very challenging, because there's a great array of contexts and there's logistical challenges around that, and that's something that I'm kind of researching at the moment. But I suppose this approach of collaborating with others, it keeps the practice rooted in the children's realities, but it's also pushing it forward artistically. So I suppose I try to make it both intimate and expansive, and I'm building my momentum, I suppose, drawing on my own position always as a mum of three, but building momentum through partnerships, touring, and professional networks that allow me to grow in ambition, I suppose. I will fly through the work, because you'll see pictures of it as it goes along, but say this was the first body of work I made, Sweet Home Sweet. It was commissioned by Sample Studios, and I can't Sample Studios have been incredible to me. Evie McCarthy is the director there, and she has such a commitment to art for young children. And she's always finding ways for me to bring work to young children on incredibly tight budgets. She's a superstar. And they commissioned me to make an early years body of work, which initially was 3 kind of sculptural houses. And the whole idea or theme, I was spending time just hanging out with the kids in the playroom, as you do, but just observing them at play. It's like an intimate peek into their worlds at home, playing with siblings and their favorite toys and so on. And so here's kind of the poster child of my practice, for better or worse, honestly. Jiggly house. So it's a mesh metal form embedded with tactile rubber elements. And yeah, I think it's, despite my love-hate relationship with it now, after many kind of years of touring around, because these things die. They don't last forever, and they need to be replenished. And it has turned out that what was quite a simple piece has become expensive to tour, and that's the reality of it. And it's the reality of making work for gallery settings for the for the public. So yeah, it kind of really highlights the challenges there. Here's Baba House that I spoke about earlier, and just to kind of talk about that, and it was a very personal piece. It was developed at a time when Cormac was, pulling to stand, beginning to walk, pulling himself up on the kitchen chair, and you can see the legs on the work kind of reflect that. And as I said, this is one of the works that I kind of freaked out about when we was in the group show with Helen in DLR Lexicon 2 summers ago. I was in the room full of children, like running around exploring the work, and I was kind of going, gee, like, will they even engage with my piece? It's very quiet. But in fact, I have seen little babies crawl up to it, pull to stand, mimicking that, touching the baby, saying Baba, turning to their mama and saying Baba, and looking back. I've seen babies kiss the little guy on there who is Cormac, and like these. And someone touched on that. It was yourself, Bernadette, about subtlety. Like, you have to be clued into subtlety if you're trying to evaluate this kind of work. So there's real subtle movements, but they reveal something important, that children bring their own voice and agency to the work. Like I always learn through the interactions. Again, this piece is Cubby House. It has a loop of a recording of my children, and it was an invitation, I suppose, for young people to discover sound and sculptural qualities. But again, I try, if I can, either through feedback from invigilators or visits to the exhibitions myself, to garner insights into how, of course, the children are actually interacting with it. And this one, they just want to put their hands through it, they just want to put their teddies through it, and so it has informed works that have gone on from that. So I'll just fly on now, because I know I'm going to run out of time too. But this is a kind of a special piece for me. It was one of the first, it was a research image initially, and then Sample were having, it was just when I had joined Sample Studios, and I wanted to kind of participate in their group show, and I had nothing, as I said, but it was like, I'll put in this, and it was in a smaller format. But what was really gorgeous, it's called Peekaboo Trip Dish. It was in a small format for that particular show, which is pictured here, but has now been developed in kind of 50 by 50 and is beautiful. The Invigilator, so this was a show with other members of Sample Studios 2D works, paintings, what have you, and largely aimed at adults. This wasn't hung in any special way or whatever. But what was gorgeous was when I came to talk to the invigilators, they were like, oh my God, it's really weird. The kids will just come in and they just go straight to your work. They're up there pointing at it. They're pulling their parents over to see it. And then beautifully, like, they're giving me stories of the children, like, mimicking the piece and doing peekaboo. And through my research, and I think a lot of us kind of might in the room be aware of this, but like children, they really gravitate to images of their peers. This little simple thing, there's Mickey Mouse on his jumper, that's their world. And I think it just kind of shows, again, giving them agency in the gallery space. So first impressions then, flying along, is my most recent body of work. It's based on kind of a family nature walk. as we try to get out on most days. But what was really, I suppose, a shift in my practice on this one was it was the first time I kind of really reached out to collaborators in a significant way, and I invited Zeba, a photographer, along to photograph this. So I only had to wear 2 hats instead of 3, the artist and the mother, and I was trying to be more present. You know, there's been a lot of that coming up. And I always find if I'm trying to capture the work as well, and you miss moments and it doesn't work. And this really worked. And I think Helen said something about, or some photographing. I just was blessed to kind of find him. He was there in just the perfect way. He was present, but he didn't interfere. And it proved to be some very rich material for works that I would go on to develop. In particular, how the children engaged with this fallen log in the space. They were rolling on it, they were sitting on it, they were just claiming it as their own, balancing things on it. And their whole body experience, I suppose, goes on to inform some of the sculptural works that came out of that. So here is part of that exhibition in Cork Midsummer Festival this year. The 2 large, I don't have time obviously to chat about all of them, but loosely idea of like kind of tree stumps or whatever came about. But I'll speak about that black piece of that black sculpture there, because I think it's quite significant. It highlights a few elements of the work. So again, something like subtle, but a couple of Christmases ago, I was wearing black velvet dress, as you do, very on tone. And my little fella, Oisín, was sitting on my lap, and he just rubbing it like that for ages. And I was like, oh, I have to make something with black velvet. And I had always wanted to make something really striking with the black and the white. And a silhouette is a kind of a reoccurring kind of thing in my work. And this is what came out of it. So it was from the nature walk. There's elements of surprise, of course. There's a triceratops in there too. But what's quite significant, I suppose, and I'll just flick back. I was thinking, Jesus, people are going to come into the gallery and say, does that woman even have children? Like, how is she putting a sculptural piece with white down for kids to interact with? But it has lasted. So it has a really robust circular piece. It has a slip cover, that is, the fabric has been created specifically to slip down onto it, and that's a really intricately fabricated frame, that circular wooden outside, and that is designed to slip up and down off that. So if worst came to worst, the slip cover can be thrown into the washing machine. It was also treated with kind of a fabric protector, and like they're the kind of things you're having to think about and negotiate and pay for when you are talking about work for early years. And I'm going to wrap up. That's why it's really important to talk about the support for this kind of practice. It demands huge amounts of resources, time, collaboration, materials, and the support. I am so privileged to have been supported by the Arts Council for the last number of years and by Cork City Council to make this really important work. I'm also have had, like you can see, it needs to stand the test of time. I am also really incredibly lucky to have some super networks, and I think it can never be overstated the work that our arts organisations do for artists. So like Babro that I've mentioned, we've got Graffiti Theatre Company down in Galway down in Cork who adopted me when I went to Cork, and they've advised me on all kinds of things. I just have a still from an animation that Niall and Graffiti put me in contact with this gorgeous composer and sound technician Carl Kennedy, and just having that network and that ecosystem of people to support you along. I'm now a Branner Mehel participant. I've only been kind of on the program since August, and I just know it's going to be such an incredible support to me. So yeah, that was a little shot. Just a quick one on that. I feel like there are people who really are buying into this now, and we've come a long way since the 10 years ago or whatever. But like, for example, when my show was in Cork Midsummer, it was in the visual arts program. and a news outlet decided to do a feature on the visual art that was in Cork Midsummer that year. Now, honestly, my ego was not bruised at all, and I know it wasn't malicious, but my exhibition was not included in that feature. And I just thought it was really interesting because, you know, I feel like there's an assumption that if work's made for children, that it doesn't need to be acknowledged in the same level as people might call real art. And I think all of us are here, you know, are fighting for that. And I think that's why this is such a celebration today, to see art for early years audiences being programmed and on our main exhibition floors. And this is not the little girl, but this is my little niece, Winnie. She's absolutely adorable. And that was at Cork Midsummer. And Evie told me how she was invigilating one day and she'd give me live feedback from the expo of interactions. And this is what I'm going to finish on. She said a little girl was in with her mum, and like just such agency being shown. The parents were being dragged around to everything. And she would not leave the gallery space. And mum was like, we have to go now. And she said, Mum, can I have this artwork? It's called Look Mama, funnily enough. It's the big triangular life-size kaleidoscope. And Mum was like, no, this is for other children to enjoy as well, and it's not for sale. And Evie was like nodding along, and she goes, but I need it in my life, Mum. And I think like that is it. Children need this in their lives, and it is our responsibility to kind of step up to the mark with that. And just a huge thank you to you all. And that's the end of my contribution. Thank you.